Misery, 1990 horror film directed by Rob Reiner, based on a novel by Stephen King, starring James Caan and Kathy Bates, who won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. Interestingly, King was initially against adapting this novel into a film after his disappointment with Kubrick's work on The Shining, but then he saw Stand By Me, another adaptation of his work, and he said, okay, fine, Misery can be done, but only if it's this particular director. And it was, of course, Rob Reiner. So the story in this starts with a famous writer who's just finished his latest novel. He got his money and fame on a series of books with the title character Misery, which are popular but apparently not highbrow, and he himself is tired of them and wants to move away and do other stuff. He has a car accident on a snowy, winding road and wakes up at the house of Annie Wilkes, a nurse and self-proclaimed #1 fan of his literature. She tells him the roads are snowed in, the phones are not working, but she can nurse him back to health. But very quickly it turns out she might have more sinister motives, and when she finds out Misery dies in the latest novel, things turn even more terrifying. So I thought this was a magnificent film, and I think its brilliance lies in the fact that it is a very competent story on three different levels. On the surface level, it's just a great two-handed thriller carried by two amazing performances. Obviously, Kathy Bates is excellent and deserved her Oscar for this wide-ranged performance, going from a soft-speaking, kind-hearted small-town woman to a cold, murderous monster, sometimes in the span of seconds. Definitely one of the all-time best villain performances. But also, the movie doesn't really work without a grounding, relatable presence from the male lead, and James Caan fills that role rather well. In fact, it was apparently a problem to find the right actor because the role was offered to everyone in Hollywood at the time, people like Jack Nicholson or Richard Dreyfuss or Warren Beatty, but they all refused, and the reason behind the scenes was that this wasn't something that a leading man wanted to play, a role of a man confined to a bed, stripped of agency and ability to act, on the mercy of a woman. Not very sexy, especially, 3 decades ago, but Caan agreed, and I think he plays off of Bates rather well. I also think on this surface level, it was a great idea to include the character of the local sheriff who continues his investigation into the missing author. Not only is he a very likable character to latch onto, his scenes also help pace the story and give us some breathing room from the confined spaces of the Wilkes farm. The second layer of the film is that it's about the dangers of fame and fandom as seen from the perspective of the artist. Apparently, Annie is kind of an extreme amalgam of various fans that King himself encountered and was afraid of. And it's a great cautionary tale of how there are some crazy people out there who might take their adoration too far and do harm to the people that they proclaim to love. It also hasn't aged a bit in the 36 years since the movie came out. I would even argue it's very relevant in the age of social media and podcast appearances and the blurring lines between the famous people's privacy and their fans having a window into that and forming these parasocial relationships. And finally, the third layer is something that King only discussed years after the book came out, and it's that Annie can be read as externalized inner demons, as the things that the artist does to himself that keep him prisoner. It is addiction, it is seclusion, it is antisocial behavior, it is obsession and fixation on doing what your fans want instead of what you want, which is also a fascinating way to look at all of this. On the technical level, I think the movie is also fascinating because it is a horror film that breaks many of the traditional rules of its genre. It takes place almost exclusively in daylight, in the warm, cozy interior of a secluded farm in winter. It has a protagonist who is basically unable to move throughout most of the film, and it has no supernatural elements. The horror and the reveals are purely grounded and psychological and perhaps as a result, all the more terrifying, including the chilling ending, suggesting a never ending PTSD for the main character and having to always be on the lookout for danger and your relationship with your fans being forever tainted. I loved it all the way through. I think it's brilliant. Definitely check this out if you haven't.